This is Talking Drupal, a bi-weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. We record this live on Wednesday afternoons on a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode number 124, Wednesday, July 20th, 2016. This is Off the Cuff number 4. Hey, guys.
Good afternoon.
It's been a while.
It's been a long time since we did an off the cuff. It's been a couple extra weeks since we've recorded, though.
Yeah, so we missed last week recording, and here we are coming a week late. So it actually hasn't been that long, but our topic today, off the cuff, is it sounds like it might be a topic that we just throw together when we have nothing to talk about, but it's not true, really. We've actually had these show notes in place for 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks now. So we're just going to talk about this and that today with our usual group of guys here that have one thing in common. So John from Oomph, welcome, John.
Good afternoon.
I see you're sporting a new haircut.
Yes, I got all of my hairs cut down to the summer length, which is good because it's been pretty hot out. So not having any hair gives me like an extra 2 minutes in the morning because I don't have to actually do my hair, and maybe up to 5 minutes because I don't actually have to dry my hair either. So it works out.
There you go. Wow, that's some serious planning.
It's an efficiency haircut.
Yes.
Plus, keeps my head cool.
I thought it would be a lazy haircut, but we could call that efficiency. We also have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Development.
Good afternoon, and looking forward to talking about a couple of things that we have on this list. It gives us a chance to kind of jump around a bit, so that's always fun. And John said it's been hot, but the last couple of days it's cooled off a bit, which is nice. So I'm enjoying the reprieve from the 93-degree heat with 120% humidity.
You know, up in New England, we only get a few days of that a year, so we cannot complain.
We've had more than average this year, though.
Think so? I mean, it didn't get cold until, it didn't even get hot until, a week and a half ago. Anyway, so I think on July 4th, I had my coat on that night watching the fireworks.
My goodness. It must have been hotter up here because it was pretty steamy that day up here.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get rolling here with our tips. I'm going to start, and this might turn into a bit of a conversation too. Do you subscribe to security updates?
Absolutely.
Oh man, you know what?
If you don't, you should. That's the tip.
Yeah, you totally should. And this actually came up in our developers meeting the other day because we were going over the recent security updates for Drupal, and I was like, is everybody in this room subscribed to the security updates? And 3 people, raised their hand, and I was like, oh, well, let me send out the link, and all of you can get subscribed to that. So, yeah, definitely important.
Especially since it turns out with Drupal 8, we'll start getting security updates that are off-cycle. So traditionally, Drupal just had security updates on Wednesday, but since Drupal 8 now includes and has the ability to update individual projects like Guzzle or Symphony or wherever else is involved, when those other projects release an important security update, Drupal will then release it as well. So it's typically always been on Wednesday, but the most recent security update for Drupal 8 was last Monday.
So Nick, those will start coming out on random days of the week?
I don't think it's random. I think typically they're still going to do Wednesday, and maybe if it's a lower level security concern, they might wait a couple of days and just do it on the Wednesday anyway. The thing is, this was a much broader.
I think Nick, it also has to do with, is it something that we have direct control over or not? So,
yeah.
Is an example of a third-party library that has a security update that's important. We're not controlling that message because it's going out in the wild already from other people. So I think those are going to come out as soon as possible would be my guess.
Yeah.
And then if it's something that we control, I mean the Drupal community controls the code, then you have a little bit more control of when you can announce it.
I mean, I think one of the big positives is that we now have a way to manage those things. So, for example, a lot of sites use the CK editor library, but when's the last time you've checked to see if that library had a security update? But now that these things are handled with Composer and handled with in core, we'll get those security updates rolled in. We'll be aware when they come out. So I think it's an advantage.
As part of my tip here, if you're not subscribing, subscribe also. If you haven't been aware that there's been some larger, highly critical issues that have come out in the past 10 days, you need to get onto the Drupal.org/security page right away and take a look.
Yeah, three of them. The three that came out last week for Drupal 7 were contrib, and they were 22, 23, and 25, I think, on the severity level. Mm-hmm. So it was RustWS, Coder, and I don't recall the third one, but Coder was unique in that Coder had the vulnerability even if you didn't have the module installed. Just having that code on your website, even if it was not enabled, was a vulnerability, which is unique. That's never happened before. And then the issue on Monday was a much broader issue. I mean, it affects most Apache projects, affects PHP, Go, Python. It has to do with it has to do with proxies. So it's important that, especially if you're using a proxy, if you're not using proxy functionality in Apache or Nginx, then turn it off. If you are using it, then it's important that you're aware of these updates. So I think I can do my tip now.
Go ahead.
My tip is, in the past I would always do git status, then git add, and add particular files, but I've recently become aware of a couple of different options you can pass to the add command, and that is -up. So -u just says basically add everything that's been updated in the files. So that includes deleted files as well as updated files and change files, modify files. And then the P option is the patch option. So what that does is that allows you to then break down individual files and choose which sections are being committed. So if you have a file where you've edited 3 or 4 different functions and you need to commit the changes to one of the functions but not the other function, if you do git add -up, you get a little dialog in the command prompt, and it says, do you want to add this chunk? Do you want to add this chunk? And you can say yes, no. There's about 10 different options you can provide for each chunk, and you can make that decision. And then once you're done, you can just commit it, push it, and that way you're not accidentally pushing debugging code or something else. You're seeing exactly what's changed.
So then you're left, if you run a status when you're done, you're left with now the changes that weren't committed showing up.
So if you do git add -up, you add a bunch of stuff and leave some other stuff out, and then you do git status, you'll see the stage commits, you'll see the files that are staged, and you'll also see the ones that you didn't add that are modified.
Gotcha.
So you'll see both, and then you commit it, and then you're left with the ones that were just modified or deleted that you didn't want to add. So you don't want to use that for every single commit, because if you have a ton of changes, then it will take a long time to get through. So I would never use that for something like adding a module. But second tip, this is a bonus. You should be separating those commits out into separate commits anyway. Whenever you add a module.
I mean, it seems to me that that's the reason you'd be doing this kind of. If you inadvertently addressed a couple of different, let's say, issues in one file, then you want to commit them independently. This is a good way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfect for that. You're working on one issue, and then
something else
high priority issue comes in, you fix it, and then you go, oh wait, I forgot I was on this other branch. You can then just check out another branch, commit the pieces that you want to commit for the hotfix, and then push that back up and switch back. Yeah. So it's a simple little thing, and it's easy to remember. Git add -up.
Yeah. So I assume it gives you, like, if you did that all the time now, does it give you a way to just say accept everything, or do you have to go through every single change?
I haven't looked at it
okay.
in depth. I imagine that there is something though.
Ah, interesting. That's
I mean, you can always,
amazing. Like, I think at least the three of us use Git every day, all day, and it's amazing still how much stuff you learn on a regular basis, things you didn't know.
yep. And that's actually one of the topics for off the cuff today. So I think we'll be talking a little bit more about Git today.
Great. So, John, you have something to throw into the table on Git. So, is this going to be a Git show? I mean,
No, it's
all
not
right.
going to be a Git show. So this is really simple. Before you commit, make sure you do a Git status. One of the really basic things that happens all the time is people commit things that they don't mean to commit. And if you do a Git status, some terminals also allow you to do a shortcut, which is GST. You can see all the files that you've changed, and you can tell, okay, if I do a commit right now, I'm going to commit all of these files, and that's what I want to do. It's just verifying your process. Where it comes in handy the most for me is when you're doing a Drupal core update, and your site has changed the htaccess file, and the htaccess file gets updated through the update. In that case, some people may just go git commit, doing an update. But if you do the GST or the git status, you'll actually see, oh, hey, htaccess changed. I don't want that to actually get committed, or I want to do a git checkout to make sure that my changes are preserved. So doing the git status before you commit is definitely very imperative.
And an alternative to taking a look at that, because sometimes when you're in that specific case, when you're updating core, there's thousands of files that change. So sometimes it's difficult to scroll through and see those. You can always do a git diff space and then the specific file you want to know if it changed or not. So you could do like a git diff space.htaccess, and it'll tell you if anything changed and what changes happened.
That's usually what I do with the htaccess file, because if an update has affected the htaccess, obviously you want to update that. But a lot of times, if you do git diff.htaccess, you'll see, oh, all that's been done is my customizations have been taken out, so I can just go back and use my original file. So that is actually a great point.
All right, let's move on to our topics, various topics of the day. Anyone want to go first?
I mean,
oh, man.
My topics are Git related, so since we're already talking about Git, you want to continue there?
Sure. Just keep down the Git.
Right.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about Git workflows and not necessarily, just give my interpretation, but certainly hear what you guys think. So I've recently started working with more people on teams with a number of my clients, and one of the primary things that I've learned is that when you're working on a project by yourself, you typically have a couple branches, you switch stuff around, and you'll create a new branch, make some changes, merge that back in, push it up, deploy that, and that's generally the extent of it. But when you're working with other people in the team, then that can very quickly degenerate into multiple conflicts and a lot of difficulty. So what I've been working on with some people is setting up a completely different workflow, and that is you create a new branch, and then you make your changes, but you push that branch up. Before you create a pull request, you then rebase onto whatever the master branch is, and then you create a pull request. So I just want to talk a little bit about alternatives, because you could also, rather than rebasing, you could just pull and merge master changes into your feature branch and then go from there.
So I actually used to be an offender of that, and somebody explained to me what the rebase command actually does in that case. And
John, you were an offender of what exactly?
Sorry, I was an offender of merging, doing a merge. So if I had a branch, say I had cut a branch from master, and I had done some work, and it may have gotten stagnant. Maybe the work took a week, or I got delayed for some reason. I would, before I did my pull request, I would do a git merge master on my branch to make sure I had the latest stuff from master. But the downfall with that is that it creates a commit message and adds a line to the history, or adds an entry to the history that the merge happened, which not necessarily important if you're just taking your changes, doing a pull request, or merging them back into master. So rebase will actually do the same thing, except it won't create that history change or that commit message. So it's ends up being a little bit cleaner in the long run, where you don't have, when you go to do that pull request or you go to merge your changes back into the master branch, you don't have all those additional merge messages in there.
Well, to clarify, it doesn't do the same thing and just not put that history commit in. It actually does something. In the back end, it does something quite a bit different. What rebase does is it basically takes, say you have master as commit A, you cut a new branch, you make commit B, C, and D, and then somebody on master merges their stuff in, and now master has commit A, E, F, and G. So what happens is when you merge, you're taking changes E, F, and G, and then placing them on top of C, and merging those changes, fixing any conflicts. If you rebase, what happens is you will roll back your commits on your feature branch. So it rolls back D, C, and B. So you're now on commit A. Then applies the commits that are a master, which is E, F, and G, and then reapplies your commits.
So it's doing them in the order that they were actually created, as opposed to just kind of mushing the two final results together.
Yeah, instead of trying to mush those together, it's basically pretending you had started with the master that now exists and then applied your commits. So it ends up being cleaner because your commits are now sequential again. And they're not like mixed in with a bunch of other stuff. So it's, rebasing is, you do need to be careful when you're rebasing because you are changing history on whatever branch you're rebasing. But it does tend to end up with much cleaner results in the end. It also allows you to do a bunch of things, like if you do a rebase with the interactive flag -I, it allows you to squash commits. So if you look at some of my older projects, you will have, commit A, moving header to the left, moving header back to the right a tiny bit, fixing it again. This one's right. Nope, that was wrong. Oops, I committed the wrong file. And then, okay, this is finally right.
Have you been looking at my commit messages, Nick?
Or you mean the commit history where you're like, oh, this module doesn't work. Patching the module, patch didn't work. Trying the dev version didn't work. Going back to the original, turns out everything worked fine.
Yeah, so the nice thing is that you can still have those ugly, god-awful commits, but then when you have the final, the correct version, you can do what's called a squash. And so you can take those 5, 10, 20, however many commits they are, smush them into one commit, and then somebody that's reviewing your code only sees that one commit. They don't have to look at the code base to see what you ended up with, and there's no missed changes anywhere. Everything's in one commit, and it's very clean, very easy to see what changed.
Nick, the workflow for that. Let's say we're dealing with a master branch and a dev branch, okay? And you've got these things locally. Where are you doing the rebase? You're doing the rebase on your local dev branch, say?
Yeah, so you do, so the command is something like, you'll be on dev branch, and you'll do, the command will be something like git rebase -I master. So if you just do git rebase master, it'll do what we initially talked about, what John, where it takes all of the changes that happen in master after you cut the branch and then put them in front of everything on the new branch. If you do git rebase -I master, it's doing something similar, but it basically gives you a list of all of the commits that you have on your branch that aren't on master. And then you just edit that file and it lets you do a bunch of things. So you can delete commits, you can rename, you can change commit messages, you can squash commits, you can reorder commits. So you can end up doing something like you are working on a feature that requires some theming. So what you can do is, and you're using something like Compass or Gulp to manage taking your SAS files and turning them into nice CSS files that actually work. So you start working on the feature, you make some changes, you commit them, you start working the theming, you commit the SAS files, you commit the CSS files, you realize you forgot to do something on the feature, you go back, you code some more, then you change some more theming, you commit everything. You can then, what you can do is you can reorder everything so you can have all of the functional commits into one commit. You can reorder all of the SAS commits into one commit, and then you can reorder, depending on your deployment method, you can put all the CSS, you can get rid of all the old CSS commits and just have the one commit that changes the CSS file. So you're not dealing with conflicts because you have some automatically generated code. And then, so you essentially would just have where you had maybe 20, 30 commits, and some were doing theming, some were doing functionality, some were just, generating the CSS code or something. You can now just have 3 commits, one that does the functionality, one that does the SAS, and then like I said, depending on your deployment process, you may or may not have the CSS in the repo.
So I got a question. So we can, before we move on, is there any reason to, once you start rebasing, to merge instead of rebase?
Well, so typically you'll rebase your feature branch, and then you do what's called a pull request. So you're basically saying, and this is on Bitbucket or GitHub or something else, and then you basically say this feature is ready, or this branch is ready to be merged into master. Somebody can then review that code. If you're working by yourself, this is probably still a worthwhile process, because then you can very quickly see this is what's changed on the branch. You can review yourself, although it's always better to have somebody else. And then once it's been reviewed, you can then merge that branch into master. And unless you're merging a bunch of different things that are changing similar functionality, you won't have a conflict there. So you actually just run the merge right through the interface of Bitbucket or GitHub.
The only reason I would see you wanting to do a merge maybe in your kind of working branch would be, maybe another reason would be just so you can note that it was merged in for some reason. Maybe 2 people working on the same branch, and you just want to let somebody know, hey, I did merge my master back in. But yeah, I agree with Nick. The likelihood is it probably won't happen for you.
Yeah, and you don't, once you, it depends on the team and conventions, that kind of stuff, but typically once you do a pull request, if somebody else is reviewing it, you don't want to do another rebase, because one of the really nice things about the pull request is that people can comment on specific lines, and this is both Bitbucket and GitHub. They can say, hey, this doesn't work, or that's broken, or do it this way instead. And then if you make those changes in Bitbucket, and if you make those changes and commit it, and it affects those lines, those comments automatically get marked as fixed or get deprecated. So you can kind of keep track of what you still need to do and what doesn't. If you rebase and then do a forced push, you're going to lose all those comments. They'll fall off to the bottom. So you're still eventually generally merging what you did, but you're typically doing it through a GitHub or Bitbucket interface.
Okay, John, you wanted to talk about Composer a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that's actually the next natural progression here, seeing as it's also kind of a command line-y thing. So Composer is basically a dependency manager for PHP code, I should say. But what Drupal is specifically using it for is managing, or can use it for, is managing modules. So in Drupal 7, you would typically use Drush, right? Drush DL module name, right? And you would download the module, and then if you were using this in conjunction with Git, you now had module code, which is third-party code, in your repository. So, an average site could have like 20 modules in it, right? So you're basically polluting your Git repository with all this module code that doesn't necessarily need to be version controlled by you, right? Well, what we've specifically done at Oomph, and I'm sure a lot of other people are doing this now with Drupal 8. Drupal 8 is actually using Composer to manage dependencies and in turn manage modules. And subsequently the modules dependencies. So Composer allows you to basically have a composer.json file and a composer lock file in your web root that you can put your dependencies in. So, I need the web form module. Okay, so I would do a composer require Drupal/web form, and it would basically go out and get the dependency for me. Now it would download it locally for me, but for the Git repo purposes, we have our modules directory ignored. So the only thing that gets uploaded to the server is the composer.json file. Now for our setup, we actually have Jenkins deploying these out to the server, and Jenkins is actually running the composer JSON and grabbing. Well, through Composer, it's grabbing the modules for you. So there is a little bit of a build step there. But Composer allows you to have basically a list in your Composer JSON file of all the modules on your site. And if you have your development environment, your production environment configured correctly, you don't actually have to have those dependencies within your Git repo. So you're not storing that third-party code in there.
I have two major questions. One
Sure.
is, does this then depend on, I imagine it does, it depends on the fact that Drupal.org has to be available to download the modules, right? And what happens if it isn't?
So if you actually look at as you go through Composer, so if you had a Composer JSON file and you were doing a Composer install, it would go through and it would so recently, we were using Packagist as the package manager for this. We recently switched over to the Drupal package manager because they just launched their own. But basically, what happens is if you watch this happen on the server, Composer goes through and it'll tell you. It'll say, "Oh, downloading the file," and if it fails, it'll actually retry it. And sometimes it'll fail the first time, and then the second time it'll be able to download the file without a problem. So yeah, there is a dependency there to make sure that the server has access to the internet and can get to the service that it needs to get these files. But most web servers have access to the internet.
So you're more dependent on the Drupal. Like every time you want to build, you're dependent on the Drupal project being fine. So if you needed you need it initially anyway to download the module, but every single time you want to build something, you need to re-download the module, right? Or is it handling it differently?
What do you mean by every time you want to build something? What is that?
So Composer also has a cache. Composer also has a cache where it stores, and my understanding of it, admittedly, is kind of rudimentary. We have a couple of really smart people at the office that kind of take care of this DevOpsy stuff for us. But the way I understand it is there's a cache built. So when you request a module, it goes into a Composer cache, and Composer will first try to go to that cache and get what it needs, as opposed to going back out to the cloud and downloading it.
Well, that makes sense.
So there is a little bit of it. It also gives you a speed improvement because you're not waiting. You're not relying on that third party to always be up and always be available.
How do you handle patching?
Slow down. So I want to make sure we're clear. So you're getting a speed improvement, John? I mean, and you were asking a question, Nick, about build. Let's be clear about when this happens, right? These updates are only, it's not like every time the app runs or once a day. This is when you request Composer to go do updates that's going to do stuff.
So let me that's a great point. Let me clarify that. The speed improvement that I was referring to was in the build process, in the process of you deploying the site and it going and building basically your Drupal site for you.
Which initially is a one-time thing until you say, hey, go update it.
Correct. So for our development servers, as I understand it, they're actually rebuilt every time. So every time we go and download Drupal and download the modules, and we're basically building those files up every time we do a deployment to our development server. But yeah, essentially, you're doing you would do a Composer install the first time around, and you wouldn't necessarily need to do a Composer update or re-download the files until you made a change to that code base.
So in your environment, if I go and make a code change to a custom module that I wrote, and I push it out for deployment, that deployment server is getting rebuilt every time it does a push to it.
Yep, so it's going to go through and it's going to say, okay, get Drupal, get all the modules. If you can get the modules out of cache, go ahead and do it. Steve made a change. Okay, pull the files, pull the code changes from the Git repo and post those up to the server. And then by the time it's done, Jenkins gives you a pretty good interface for you to be able to say, oh, okay, my build is done. You go to the site and it shows up just as it should.
Right. So one more question before your patch question, Nick, is what is the advantage of doing it this way?
So the major advantage is you don't have third-party code in your Git repo because ultimately, you're never... Unless you're patching a module, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but unless you're patching a module or you're hacking a module, which is no, don't do that, you're never really touching that code, right? It's always up on Drupal.org. Maintainers are maintaining it. New versions are coming out, so on and so forth. So there's no real reason for it to be in your repository. And going back to the conversation we had before about Git, when you do a pull request and you've enabled a bunch of modules, previously there would be thousands of files in there in your pull request because you added 6 or 7 modules that nobody needs to review because unless they're going to submit a patch to Drupal.org, it doesn't really make a difference. So it keeps you the biggest benefit is it keeps your Git repo cleaner. It also allows you to be able to open one file and see all of the dependencies that are on a site and also the version numbers that are installed. So you can say, oh, okay, I have, field groups, right? Field groups, 8.1.7 alpha. Oh, well, there's an update to that. Let me go in and either update the file directly, or you can run a Composer command that'll allow you to update the file. So it gives you a little bit it gives you one place to look for kind of your dependencies. The other nice thing, and this is actually true of the address field. So part of the new commerce initiative is that a lot of the components that go into commerce now are going to be turned into PHP libraries that can be used by other communities on other projects. And address field is one of those scenarios. So basically, what's happening is now you do a Composer require for the address field, and what it does is it goes out and gets the address field Drupal module, but then it also downloads all of the PHP libraries that are associated for that are dependencies of that module. So now you're actually not just doing, the Drush DL and then having to go download a bunch of other libraries. It's doing that all for you. So over the course of time, I see a lot more Drupal 8 modules doing that, where, oh, I need a JavaScript library. Well, Composer can take care of. Well, actually, that's a poor example because Composer is a PHP management. So there may have to be another step there where you go get the JavaScript library. But in the address example, we'll go back to that one because it's safe. It goes and gets the PHP libraries for you that are necessary. So it can definitely help you out.
And patching.
So, patching. There is another library, or another, it's a Composer library that we're using that actually allows us to enter into our Composer JSON files information about patches. And what happens is when you add that entry into your Composer JSON file for the patch, it'll actually go download the version of the module the patch applies to, and then it'll apply the patch. Now, it'll do that on every install. So every time you add a patch, it'll go, it'll get the module, apply the patch. So all of that is actually happening in the Composer JSON file as well.
Can you provide patches locally, or do they have to be on Drupal.org?
Yeah, it just asks for a path to the patch. So whether the patch is on Drupal.org or it's a local patch, you could go either way.
Very cool.
Interesting. It must be painful to get this running the first time.
It's something that we're really committed to, and there have been some growing pains, but ultimately you can definitely see the benefits of being able to rapidly set up a development environment, both locally and on a new server with this approach. So it's definitely paying off.
Great. So let's talk about Drupal 8. I'm interested to know.
Yes, let's.
I'm interested to know what you guys think about the learning curve. And I'm more talking about the learning curve from the dev side, from like custom coding and stuff. Because I think the site building side has been pretty easy and straightforward.
I don't know if I'd agree with that 100%,
right.
But
it doesn't seem as painful to me. So
yeah.
I am feeling the pain of the Drupal 8 learning curve when I'm starting to, like anything you do with Drupal, I guess any other project or product, is you kind of do some superficial things first, but then when you dig down into delivering a final product to someone, a lot of the things that seemed very simple to do, even if it was custom coding in Drupal 7, I have found to be extremely painful in Drupal 8.
Yeah, I think the word for me is brutal. The learning curve has been brutal. And I think, and I don't know how much of it is just trying to learn something new, or how much it is, I don't know where a lot of the pain is coming from necessarily, but I find that I think a big part of it is documentation. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of documentation for a lot of the things that you're trying to do in Drupal 8 yet. Whereas in Drupal 7, I think we've been spoiled the last maybe 2 years, where most things, most problems have already come up and have at least some sort of workaround that works in the comments. And Drupal 8 just doesn't really have that. Now, the API...
And when you say documentation, you mean just searching for things in Google, I assume.
Yeah, so I mean, many times you'll come up with, you'll search for something, and the api.drupal.org will come up with that function, and then there's no real explanation of how it's meant to be used. Like, it kind of says, here's the code, here's the parameters. There's no real discussion. There's no comments below. There's no examples of how somebody used it. You'll search core, you'll search a couple of modules, and there's no, like, the API will say use this function, and then you'll search core, and it's not used a single time in core. They do an example of that is redirects. Like I remember dealing with, this is actually an example where there was some documentation. You used to use Drupal goto. So just be Drupal goto the path and then maybe an array with some query parameters or something. In Drupal 8, it says, there's a change, I forget what they call it, it's essentially a change log, the change notification for Drupal goto that says don't use this anymore. In Drupal 7 you did this. In Drupal 8 you can do it this, or this. So there's like 4 or 5 different ways to do a redirect on a form, and it says if you want to do it procedurally, do this. If you want to do it this way, there's 3 or 4 different examples in documentation, and none of them work. And then there's about a dozen comments below where people are discussing the best way to do it. And it turns out the best way to do it is by not using Drupal at all and just using the Symfony HTTP redirect method. And you end up with, rather than just a clean, simple function that redirects a page, you end up with a method call that's 70 characters long. So in that, and it's not just big things where this happens. I've found, I've been doing a fairly significant amount of coding in Drupal 8 over the last maybe 2 months, and I find that almost every single little thing that thing that used to have like a nice little function in Drupal 7 is either deprecated in Drupal 8, or takes a lot of research, and things like getting the actual real path. It used to be just Drupal_real path, which still exists in Drupal 8, but is deprecated, so it's better not to use it. But to get it actually working takes a little bit of work.
I mean, Nick, I also find that some of the Drupal 7 methods for doing things do still work, or haven't been ported over to Drupal 8 fully to be to kind of apply to the new way of doing things. Are you finding that as well, where there are certain functions and certain things that you need to do on the regular that just basically require you to use Drupal 7 code, but again, documentation is poor. You can't find that anywhere.
Yeah. I find many times that that's the case, and then there is one thing that's really, really nice that I found generally was a lifesaver, and that is in Drupal 7 you would use Devel's module. I'm blanking on it. DPM or DSM. I think you could also use, and you'd be able to kind of view the array and see a bunch of stuff. And there's an equivalent in Drupal 8 called KSM, and it gives you the full array, it gives you the list of the methods that are available for that particular object, and it can really help you out sometimes when you're trying to find something. But if you have an array that's in any way complicated, like an entity, then sometimes loading that page will take 2 minutes
forever,
or 3 minutes.
And then it's almost unusable.
Yeah, and then it will finally load, and then you won't be able to expand the array or something. So it's incredibly, incredibly difficult sometimes. And then things like even things that are supposed to make, in general, simpler. One of the advantages of Drupal 8 is that things are supposed to be standardized, so that you have things like, typically when you're doing object-oriented coding, you have like getter methods and setter methods for different properties. Drupal 8 has decided, well, I should say has decided because it's a community effort, but it seems that many getter methods do not have the get prefix, but the setter methods do. So you end up with things like, instead of get ID, you end up with just ID, which is still okay because you can standardize on that. So you can just say, okay, this entity I want the ID, this menu item I want the ID, this role I want the ID. That works. But then you find edge cases like the language code, where for some reason, when you're dealing with the language entity, it's get ID, not ID. So, and again, it's a situation where, a lot of the benefits of Drupal 8 should have made getting the ID very simple. It turned into a 30-minute process because I had to find a way to KSM that entity, or that object rather, and then find a place in the code where it would actually output, and then spend 10 minutes refreshing my page so I could actually view the different methods. And ultimately, I guess I have another tip this week. Ultimately, what I found is useful is just using hinting on the different entities. So if you're trying to do something on an entity, just type that little arrow. I don't know, there's going to be a name for that. It's just arrow, the method arrow, and just start typing something in, and your IDE will start populating
Yeah.
what the options are. And that's eventually how I, like in the language code example, that's how I actually ended up finding it.
Right.
So sometimes it's useful just to see what those methods are, and then eventually you can sometimes find that documentation on the API page and see what the different methods do. But it's, yeah, I would say.
I'm wondering if like part of it is our Drupal knowledge, like our Drupal 7, like that's the Drupal way to do it. Things is Drupal 7 and hurting us, and maybe if we were coming from a different PHP environment, that some of the stuff in 8 would seem more natural.
I don't know. I think that's certainly part of it, as being, largely taught to code through Drupal. I think that's part of it. But I also had some conversations with some more traditionally trained developers the other day, and they said that some of the stuff is fairly unorthodox as well for them. And their advice was to download Symfony directly, learn Symfony, and because Drupal is built on Symfony, you can, if you have difficulty doing something in Drupal, then rather than doing it in Drupal 7, it used to be if you couldn't do something in Drupal, you just wrote straight PHP.
Right.
With this version, we have the advantage of rather than doing it straight in PHP, we can just do it with Symfony. And I found that that's been the solution for a couple things, like the redirects, like being unable to write a Drupal code to, you just use the HTTP redirect class in Symfony.
Yeah, I tend to agree with everything that you said, Nick. A lot of our back-end developers and web engineers have been doing things in Drupal 8, and they've found the same thing. Kind of the documentation is lacking. Things that exist, they had no idea. And no idea if the method that they were trying to use would actually work. So it is taking more time to do things, and they are also saying that some of the things that are being done are not OOP, not standard OOP practices. So it'll be interesting to get more of those types of people into the community and hear what they have to say, and also just get everybody on board with writing documentation and working towards better documentation. It seems to be the issue that Drupal is plagued with. When Drupal 7 came out, it was the same thing, and now we're in a spot where we feel like the Drupal 7 documentation is good, but now we're on to Drupal 8. So.
Yeah, I think.
And I'm not sure. I'm just gonna come back to the word documentation. I'm not sure that it's as much documentation. I wouldn't go as far as saying the Drupal 7 documentation is so good. It's just that there's so much information out there when you go to search. Someone has typically had the same problem you're having and has written about it somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
whether it's on Stack Exchange or an issue.
Yeah, it's somewhere. I mean, it seems like it always pops up, and that's the problem on the Drupal 8 side that I'm having, is that I can't find anyone with the same problems typically.
Yeah, and I think that brings up another issue that Drupal has perennially dealt with, but I think is going to become more and more pronounced. When you switch Drupal versions, for a long time, searching for a Drupal issue, when Drupal 7 came out, you get Drupal 6 solutions that just didn't work. And the same thing with Drupal 6. When Drupal 6 came out, you get Drupal 5 solutions. When Drupal 5 came out, Drupal 4 solutions. I think the problem here, or maybe not a problem, but something, it's a little bit more unique now in that Drupal 7, I think Drupal 6 at its peak had 200,000 installs or something like that, maybe more, but say 10,000 modules and 200,000 installs. Drupal 7 had like 1.3 million installs and 40 or 50,000 modules. So we're talking about a much, much, much longer tail on Drupal 7 than there ever was on even Drupal 6. So we're looking at a situation where, search results, Drupal 7 search results will dominate for a very, very long time. And we need to find a way to, as a community, we need to find a way that easily gets answers in front of the version that you're actually searching for.
Let's hit one more topic today. So we got a few more on our list here, but we're running out of time. So does anyone have anything here that they feel strongly about?
I got an interesting issue that I think I've dealt with a few times and I've never found maybe the cleanest solution.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, and I'd be interested to hear how you guys have solved this, and then with John's company's deployment method, how they would solve it, and that is deleting code. So whenever you remove a module, you always have to do, the order of operations has to be, you disable it, uninstall it locally, you delete the code, you test it, you commit that. Before you deploy it, you need to then disable it and uninstall it on the live server. So I've got a situation where I've got a client where they use update hooks to change everything. Like, they don't do anything on the website ever. On the live, they always just write an update hook, and it's brilliant. It's great. It's the first time where I've really used update hooks extensively. I'd used them a couple of times with features, but this is the first time.
Code, so it's all code based.
Yeah, everything is code based.
Yeah.
Down to reverting features. So that way, if you pull the code, grab the database, no matter what state that database is in, the feature update, the update hooks will bring you to the same position. So we've written an update hook to remove a bunch of modules, disable some modules, and uninstall them. So then, the next commit would then delete the modules, or the next branch, or next pull request, or whatever. But now you're in a situation where you pull, those modules are deleted, the update hook goes to run, it can't uninstall them because they don't exist.
Because the code's gone.
Because the code's gone. So how do you manage?
And then Drupal 8 gives you that great screen that says, your site's temporarily unavailable.
Yeah, this is actually Drupal 7 site, so it's not unique to Drupal 8. But how do you handle? I mean, the current solution, I can give you guys, if you want, I can give you guys what our current solution is. I mean, it's the fairly obvious one, but I don't know how you guys have dealt with this, because I can't count the number of times where it almost never happens in production, thankfully, but you push a branch to a new development environment and you forget that a module is deleted in that particular development environment that hadn't had it removed, and then all of a sudden you're getting the nice white screen of death everywhere, and then you have to commit the module again so that it shows up so that you can uninstall it. And then
that scenario typically happens with us on local environments where somebody's local is a little bit out of date from what's on the actual development server. And in that case, the approach is one of two things: either take a dump of the database to get the latest stuff, or, like you said, Nick, install the modules and then uninstall them just to go through that process. So we don't typically see this on development on our development servers because
you never uninstall modules.
Well, no, people are more working locally. So, like, if you're testing a module, you're testing it locally. You're not testing it on an actual development server. So, whatever you're pushing to development is.
Well, I've seen it happen a couple of times on like Pantheon or Acquia where you'll push code. And then the database is different on staging versus dev, and then you were working with dev, you go to staging to QA it. You can't really pull the dev database up. So, or rather, you have it working, you want to test the deployment, so you pull the live database down to staging so you can test it, but the code has been removed.
Right.
So I see that happen all the time. I mean, it's not a production, but like I said, then you end up in a position where you then have to you have an extra two commits because you have to commit the code, remove the modules, remove the code, and so you end up. I mean, how do you guys handle it?
I usually go with like be careful.
Process.
Be careful, be complete. Like if you're working on a module, don't like walk away from it if it's like, oh, the dev server has the module still enabled, but the main dev branch that you're pushing to that server has it disabled. Well, okay, make sure you go and disable it. Make sure you complete the circle. The other thing is, knowing Drupal and knowing that, like, if you're removing a module, you need to uninstall it first. Don't just go into the code and remove it, because that's going to definitely break stuff. Make sure you uninstall it from the site, so on and so forth. With that said, I think it's worthwhile to have some sort of coded solution that can say, hey, this module is not present anymore. Maybe we should run some sort of script to uninstall it before we go ahead and build the server out, because if we don't, it's gonna fail. But as far as I know, there is no we don't have a method for checking that right now. Not to say it's not in the works, not to say that somebody smarter than me isn't already thinking about it. I just am not aware of that.
No, you just give me an idea. I mean, you could just add. I mean, it would make that particular update rather large, but you could just go through and grab the uninstall function from all of the modules. Because that's all the when you're uninstalling, all it does is run that uninstall function if it exists. I believe. I mean, does it do anything else? I could always look.
I mean, it updates your database. It does whatever it's got to do to install it. So
you could always just copy all of those and just run those functions directly. But I can't imagine that that's standard practice.
I mean, you could also, like I said, you could write some sort of script or something for Jenkins, so that when Jenkins is doing a deployment, it's checking that. I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about how exactly that would work, but I would imagine that there's a way that you can do a check for that and say, oh, hey, this module is not present in the repository I'm pushing, but it is present here. Either pop up a message that says, hey, did you remember to uninstall this, or have Jenkins do it for you.
So, Nick, what was your solution?
Write the update hook to uninstall the modules and do what we needed to do. Make sure everybody knows, propagate that particular branch to every other branch, like rebase that branch on every other branch, basically. Run it on every dev environment that makes sense. Run it on production. Then after that's done, make a whole new branch and remove the code.
Because in reality, it's a database issue, right?
Yeah.
Databases aren't in sync.
Well, no, not necessarily, because you'll have a function being called. Like, you might have a page that relies on something, so you'll click on a link that's supposed to hit a flex ladder, and you remove flex ladder, for example. So it's not just database, but it's also database. So like, it might be expecting a file.
You introduced another issue. I mean,
yeah.
Right.
Sounds more like a workflow issue than an actual. I mean,
yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I had this issue a couple of weeks ago where somebody's local site was bombing out, and I was like, "Why is this?" And you look at the error logs, and it's like, "Oh, looking for this module, it's not there. Looking for that module, it's not there." Oh, okay. You quickly understand what the issue is. But as far as like actual development environments, it sounds like more of a workflow issue than a technology issue. I don't know if I believe that.
Okay.
Hey, let's jump to our module of the week.
Sounds good to me.
We've got node edit protection. Has anyone ever used this before?
Nope.
So what it does is it's a module that uses some pretty straightforward JavaScript and would give a user a prompt to verify they want to leave the page if they've made changes to it. So it could be good for admins. So an admin is editing content and they kind of flip in between tabs, or they go to leave the page and it's prompting them, hey, by the way, you need to save these changes. I found it to be useful when you've created an interface that has like tabs, like you got like a single node form, but you've put the stuff in tabs, so they're tabbing between different sections of the form, and there's one save button at the bottom, and it might not always be clear to them what they're saving and not saving. So yeah, it gives you a JavaScript alert that says, hey, you sure you want to leave this page? You have saved changes that haven't been saved.
Okay, so it doesn't specify what changes happened. It just
no. It's just a simple alert.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. No, I've not used that before. Is it Drupal 8 or just Drupal 7?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I think we're gonna have to start adding that to the module of the week.
Yeah, I know, and we've
Just
been
Drupal
kind
7.
of remembering to look it up, and I don't remember for this one.
It's just Drupal 7.
It could be, there's a number of modules I think that do the same kind of thing. So there could be one available for 8. And it's basic enough code you could probably put something together yourself if you wanted to. All right. Anything else, guys? Before we call this a day.
I don't think so.
I think that's about it.
All right. Well, have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Take care, guys.